We've had a couple days to think about what the Jets did in the NFL draft, so let's break down how they did today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, May 1st, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Today we have our weekly mailbag. Each Wednesday we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. Thanks so much to everybody who sent in questions. Let's begin. Our first question. John, what was your favorite pick the Jets made in the NFL draft? The risk of being uncreative, I'd have to go with the first pick they made, Olu Fashanu at 11th overall. And it wasn't just the pick. It was like the big picture stuff. It was just the overall philosophy. It was the way the Jets operated. I thought what the Jets did was really, really savvy in the first round. It was very unlike your typical Joe Douglas move. When the Jets hired Joe Douglas in 2019, he was sold to us as a guy who was, had learned from Ozzie Newsome and, had come from the Philadelphia Eagles. He spent most of his career outside of a 2-year stretch where he was with the Bears. Most of his career has been with two very successful organizations, the Baltimore Ravens, where he came up, and then the Philadelphia Eagles, where at the time it sounded like he was Howie Roseman's right-hand man. And these are, two organizations that really know their stuff. And, if you look at the lack of success the Jets have had under Joe Douglas, I think a lot of it's just that, he hasn't operated. It doesn't feel like he's learned the lessons from those two organizations. He's operated in a very different way. He doesn't really operate the Jets like the Ravens or the Eagles. What I saw on Thursday night was a guy who was operating his team like the Ravens or the Eagles. What does Joe Douglas usually do? Joe Douglas usually zeroes in on a handful of prospects. And, I think when you talk about the struggles Douglas has had in the draft, and that's particularly true once we get past the first round, Douglas at this point has really only drafted 2 quality starters past the first round. And one of them was Breece Hall, who was still a top 40 pick. So after we get past the top 40, the only guy that Douglas has drafted who's been a good starter has been Michael Carter II. And I think a lot of this goes back to how Douglas just seems to zero in on certain prospects. And look, there's a fine line when it comes to scouting. You obviously need to target. You need to find the guys who are good prospects, but it just feels like Douglas's board seems too small sometimes, where he's overly aggressive trying to get certain guys instead of kind of letting the board come to him, understanding that there are great prospects to be had, even if it's not the guy you're totally focused on. There's still probably going to be a really good prospect who falls to you if you know how to scout. In the first round, there was all the talk about how the Jets really, really wanted Rome Odunze, and it was not hard to see why. I liked Rome Odunze a lot, and there were some reports that the Jets tried to trade up for him, but this was one of the few times where we've seen Douglas operate in a way where he realized, there's a pretty good plan B here. And it was Olu Fashanu. And in addition to getting Olu Fashanu, you were able to trade down and get an extra pick. So your plan B involves you getting a really good offensive lineman and an extra pick. And, would I rather have Rome Odunze than Olu Fashanu right now? Yeah, probably. But would I rather have Rome Odunze or Olu Fashanu and 3 extra 4th-round picks? I'd probably take the latter. And why do I say 3 extra 4th-round picks? Well, the Jets acquired an extra 4th-round pick trading down from 10 to 11. If we're talking about what it would have taken for the Jets to move up for Rome Odunze, we're probably talking about the 2 4th-round picks they had at the time. And so I think this was a really savvy move. And I think big picture, I liked Odunze better than Fashanu in general. And I like Odunze better than any offensive lineman, any tackle who was not Joe Alt. But in general, I think the Jets are better served adding a tackle than they were adding a wide receiver, because you need a tackle. You just needed a tackle. I mean, you could probably get through this season with Garrett Wilson and Mike Williams. And, and they did end up getting Malachi Corley, of course, in the 3rd round. So, that this statement's kind of void anyway. But you'd have a really tough time getting through this season with just Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses, because I think Tyron Smith's getting injured. But longer term, the Jets had nothing at the tackle position. At the wide receiver position, you at least have Garrett Wilson, and now you have Malachi Corley, of course. But I'm talking about the frame of mind when the Jets were picking in the first round, and you had nothing at tackle. You had no starting. You didn't even have a starting tackle for next season. So I think adding a tackle was really essential. And so I think there's the obvious, which is the Jets really, really needed to add a tackle. I think anybody thinking, well, we have Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses for the season. Well, you're not thinking far enough ahead, because just 1 year from now, Jets are going to have issues at the tackle position. But even if we're talking this year, you need somebody who's going to be able to step in and give you a couple games, because Tyron Smith is going to miss some time due to injury. So that was my favorite. I know it's easy to say the first round pick, and obviously he's the guy who's most likely to have success out of any of the players the Jets drafted. But I just really, really liked. I liked the maneuvering. I liked the mindset. I liked the discipline. It was very, very un-Joe Douglas like. And the other move that I thought was it was kind of like the kind of channeled the Thursday night version of Joe Douglas was trading the 4th round pick for the future 3rd round pick, because there's a guarantee that it's going to be at least 30 spots better than the pick the Jets gave up. Next, all you have to do is wait 1 year, and you've improved your draft positioning somewhere between 30 and 60 spots. That's pretty good. So that was the second move. It wasn't really a player the Jets drafted, though. My favorite player drafted was Roma Dunze. Next question. How do you feel about the Jets going with 3 young running backs behind Breece Hall and thus without a veteran option? I think running back is a young man's position. The one area I worry a little bit about is pass protection. That's always an issue with young running backs. Braylon Allen's a guy who's really struggled in pass. Braylon Allen's interesting because he has some really, really good reps on film where he's a pass protector. There's also some really, really excellent individual games. The game they played against Illinois last year, you see a lot of reps where in that game where he looks really good in pass protection, but overall he's very inconsistent. And that's just true of any young guy who steps into the NFL. But here's the thing. Last year, the Jets veteran back was Dalvin Cook, who historically has been a really lousy pass protector. So when we're talking about concern, how do I feel about it? The only concern is, finding a back who can block, because you've got to keep this quarterback upright, and that's the thing that keeps young running backs off the field more than anything else, is an inability to help in pass protection. It's tough to do. It's, you have to make some pretty complex reads sometimes, because the running back in many cases is there to pick up the last guy who blitzes, and that guy could be coming from a couple different angles. There are things that are known as a dual read, where essentially there are 2 guys you could pick up, and you have to watch both of them and then maneuver your body to get in front of them. But other than that, how many times have we seen the Jets bring in the big name veteran and it doesn't go well, including Dalvin Cook? We could go down the list. Matt Forte was an example. Chris Johnson was an example. You can just go on. Le'Veon Bell didn't work out. LaDainian Tomlinson, even people remember him very fondly. That did not go as well as people remember. After he essentially LaDainian Tomlinson had a great first 5 games. And they had a nice little run in the 2010 playoffs, but outside of that, he was a very ordinary back for the Jets. So I like the idea of going young. I think that's the way to go. Will it work out? It's difficult to say, but I think we've seen that. If you're going to get a back who's got experience in the league, it should be a guy on his second contract and a guy who wasn't used that heavily during his first contract. A good example of that, and I'm dating myself here, but Michael Turner, when the Falcons signed him 15, 16 years ago, he was a guy who had backed up LaDainian Tomlinson in San Diego. So there was a good reason he wasn't playing, but he ripped off big gains. He consistently posted a very high average per carry when he did play. So that's the type of back you should go out and get in, and you're not going to have many backs as good as Michael Turner, but you should be looking for guys who have talent, who haven't gotten much work with their first team if you're going to go a little bit older. But in general, I think the principle of going young is what you should do at the running back position, because we've seen that these guys do not age well at that spot. Now, ahead, you're on the Locked On Jets podcast. We'll turn our attention back to the offensive line. We've already talked about Olu Fashanu, but Jets didn't really do much on the line after Fashanu. Is that a reason for concern? I'll tell you what I think continuing this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Tough loss for the New York Knicks last night. They're heading back to Philadelphia for Game 6, and I think they're hoping to close that series out. They don't want this thing to go back to the Garden for Game 7, but if you're heading down to Philly for Game 6, or if there is a Game 7, Game Time's the place to find your tickets. I've used it myself. Can't believe how easy it is to use. A couple of times I've been, just an hour or two before an event, I pulled out the Game Time app. I couldn't believe the deal I found. And you get the view from your seat, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. A couple taps, amazing deal, and you've got great seats. Game Time is the place to be for NBA tickets or for any other kind of tickets. Take the guesswork into buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. It's Locked On NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you every day, as this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. We continue now with our weekly mailbag. Next question, John, were you surprised at all that the Jets did not address interior offensive line in the draft? Given what's going on with the Jets and with other teams, I was hoping they would have added depth for guard and center. Yeah, I think if you're talking like big picture dislikes with this draft, I would probably go there. I probably would go that they didn't take a lineman on day 3. And, that's when the Jets have gotten a lot of criticism for taking 2 running backs on the third day of the draft. And this is the spot where I think it's kind of valid because your running back is one of the lowest value positions in the league. So I like the general idea of doubling up at a position on day 3. I don't think it's a bad idea necessarily to double up at a certain position on the third day of the draft, because day 3 picks, most of them aren't going to work out anyway. This goes deeper when people say, the Jets, if a team has 7 picks on the third day of the draft, someone will say, well, all 7 of these guys aren't going to make the team. And my response to that is always, well, who cares? That you're not drafting 7 contributors in the long run anyway. So if you cut them, 3 years down the line, or you cut them this year, what difference does it really make? You're gonna eventually, weed out the guys who aren't good anyway. So you're just doing it sooner. But if you look at a lot of the great offensive lines that are built in this league, or you look at how you get offensive line depth, occasionally you have to hit on somebody in the third day of the draft. And the fact that Jets didn't even, take a shot on anybody, I think that could be an issue. Now, most offensive lines that are great are built through the day 1 picks, the first round picks. So that's where Olu Fashanu comes in, because the Jets are going to build a great offensive line, and hopefully Elijah Vera Tucker is included in that mix. Those guys are going to be the meat of a great offensive line. And even a high day 2 pick like Joe Tippmann, the Jets at least have the outline of an offensive line that could work. Now, will it work? I mean, every single guy I just mentioned has questions to at least some degree. Fashanu's never played in the NFL before. AVT, we know he's got his issues staying on the field because of injuries. And Tippmann, he's entering year 2. So, I thought that for year 1, what he did was pretty good. But, there's a question, can he improve his level of play for year 2? But, your 4th or 5th guy, usually you have to find a guy who's you hit on somebody a little bit later in the draft. And especially to find depth. And I think that's the key point. And I don't even know that we're talking so much depth for this year, because the lineman you draft on day 3 probably going to be a work in progress, probably someone who's going to need to refine his game to an extent. But in the long run, year 2, year 3, you hope that guy has improved enough to the point where, he actually can handle a role, even if it's just a backup role. And you want, and it gives you peace of mind. If you want offensive line depth in this league, you have to draft, because the good offensive linemen, they're starters. And eventually, you can't find them in free agency, because if a good offensive lineman hits free agency, even if he's a backup for his current team, if he's good, he'll find a starting role. Teams do not have enough quality starters in this league to fill all the spots. So I think that, not drafting, if I had 2 big picture issues with what the Jets did, one is that they did not draft, anybody who they could develop as offensive line depth. The second would be that this was viewed as a very, very deep wide receiver draft. and they did not draft a wide receiver who projects as an outside receiver. They drafted Corley in the third round, who could be very good, but Corley's not a guy at this point who you would project as an outside receiver. Even if we're talking about a guy who is more of a project, I would have liked to have seen the Jets draft somebody who has the upside, who has some upside as an outside receiver. So that's my general view on this. Next question, John. I was surprised to see JD take a high ceiling tackle prospect who will sit behind Tyron Smith this year as a backup. This tell me Joe's job is safe for 2025. Were you surprised this draft wasn't more boom or bust? I don't know that I agree Joe's job is safe for 2025. I mean, nor should it be. I mean, he hasn't had a winning season yet. I mean, if the Jets don't win this year, I don't see how he could be safe. Now, is Woody Johnson telling him that? I mean, I don't know. But even if he is, we know Woody has backed out of deals like this in the past. I mean, there are lots of Jets former general managers and coaches who were told that they would be safe, and then Woody eventually changed his mind because the season didn't go well. So, I think that the Jets were focused, I think, on the offensive side of the ball because that's the that was the weakness of the team. I mean, look at the picks the Jets made in the early stages of the draft. They drafted Olu Fashanu, they drafted Corley, they drafted Braylon Allen. I mean, the first 5 picks the Jets made were on the offensive side of the ball. But the Jets also did the Jets also on paper filled some holes in the offseason. So, because they got the way I view it is that, when they signed Tyron Smith, I said this at the time when they got Morgan Moses, it wasn't that they really filled their long-term holes. It's that they essentially prevented the position from being a disaster in case there was a run on players at a certain position early in the draft. If they didn't sign Tyron Smith, they would have had to take a tackle. And what would have happened if the first 3 tackles went off the board in the top 10? It would have put them in a really tough spot. So I don't know that this necessarily is a sign that Joe Douglas, his job is safe because, after adding the tackles, they still needed to address the position in the longer run. And, look, Douglas, if he wants to keep his job, if everybody keeps saying, well, if Douglas's job was on the line, he would have been more aggressive to improve the team in the short run. You have to remember, if Douglas wants to be here for the long run, he still has to balance the short run. He still has to balance the here and now with a couple of years down the line, because he's gonna get if you're Douglas and you save your job this year and the team stinks in the future, you're still fired. You're just putting off your firing. You want the team to be successful. So I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily a case where Douglas's job is safe because he picked Fashanu. Now, had you on the Locked On Jets podcast, let's turn our attention to the John Franklin Myers trade. The Jets traded the defensive lineman on day 3 of the draft. What do I think about it? That's one of our next mailbag questions. I'll give you my thoughts continuing here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying, flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure, and there's always new timed events that can help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Wednesday. We're doing our weekly mailbag show. We continue our next question. John, how do you feel about the JFM trade? He seemed like a fan favorite. Do you think the Jets got fair value even with the salary dump? I don't think the Jets got fair value. I was not thrilled with the trade. In fact, that was my least favorite thing the Jets did all weekend was trading JFM because quality player. I mean, part of it's, this was a guy who they got him off the waiver wire. He worked really, really hard. He became a quality starter. He got a good payday from the Jets, continued to produce for the team. And it's not that JFM was untradeable. I mean, heck, I suggested it a couple times during the course of the offseason, but I don't think they got good value. And I don't know exactly how they're planning to go about replacing him because I think he was kind of a unique player and he played a pretty valuable role on the defense. The Jets in the back 7, the guys who were, the linebackers, the safeties, the corners, the Jets defensive coaches emphasize speed. And that means you're typically playing with guys who were small on the smaller side. And you've seen that manifest itself in many ways. Like, how many times have the Jets like used a safety at linebacker? And it's because safeties are faster than linebackers. So the Jets like really focus on speed, and that comes at the expense of size. And one of the reasons the Jets have been able to pull that off is that they have this bigger, this 290-pound defensive end, a guy who's much bigger than your typical defensive end on a 4-man front. And you have guys who are big, but JFM was also a good pass rusher. He was also good at collapsing the pocket. So I don't know exactly how they replace his role. I have concerns about how the Jets are going to be able to handle the run because, I think to the extent the Jets have been able to hold up against the run, a lot of it's been because, again, you're bigger up front. Jermaine Johnson's a good run defender, but he's pretty big, but he's not JFM size. I mean, he's still quite a bit smaller than JFM. Look, at the end of the day, I mean, it seems like this was a salary dump. And look, the Jets got a 6th-round pick for a guy who's a good starter. When the Jets trade a 6th-round pick for a guy who's a good starter, we're all really happy about it. So I think it's fair to be equally disappointed when the Jets only get a 6th-round pick for a good starter. And again, it was a salary dump. And look, this comes back to Douglas's cap management. How many times have we talked on the show about Douglas's poor cap management? Jets around like a quarter of the Jets cap space this year is tied up in dead money. Dead money is like money you're paying to guys, money that counts against the cap for guys who aren't here anymore. And I don't think they say, they only saved like $7 million or so in trading JFM. I'm surprised this was the move. If they need to free up $7 million, I feel like there were other places they could have gone here. I don't understand why they traded JFM. And like the reports from the beat writers suggest that it wasn't that the Jets love JFM. This wasn't a case where like they wanted to get him off the team. Like by all accounts, he was a guy who was very popular in the locker room, a guy the coaching staff really liked. I do not like this move. I'll tell you straight up, I do not like this move. I think JF, a quality player. Look, he's not a star. Like to make a defense work, everybody can't be a star. Some guys have to do the dirt. Sometimes you need some guys to do the dirty work. That's what JFM did. I did not like that trade at all. That was my least favorite thing the Jets did during the draft. In fact, I would even say that was the least favorite thing the Jets did during the course of the entire offseason because there's no way to replace him now. Back in March, we were talking about signing Jadeveon Clowney, and Jadeveon Clowney could actually play the JFM role pretty well. He's not as big as JFM, but he's the same type of player where he can shut down the run and he can collapse the pocket. I don't know where you find the replacement for JFM now. Yeah, I was not a fan of that. And our last question, John, like so many Jets fans, I was quite irritated with the team the last weekend, but have been pleasantly surprised to see so many analysts give us high marks. I've made peace with losing out on Bowers, and I'm quite happy with the first 2 choices. That said, was annoyed to see us continually trade down and out of the 4th round when originally there were so many highly ranked tight end prospects available. Given our lack of talent at the position, do you believe that acquiring these extra picks was worth losing out on those prospects? I did not dislike the trade downs. A couple of reasons. One is like, if you listen to the show every day, you know that like I'm a big believer in trading down and acquiring extra draft picks because draft is a very unpredictable sort of thing. It's as much as we act like we know how a prospect is going to turn out, we don't know that much about them. You essentially get to the point in the scouting process where you're making educated guesses, where you hope that you know enough that that points you in the right direction. Say this guy has a good shot of succeeding, but as we all know, like, and especially when you get to day 3. It's really much more random than people want to admit. And the best way to have a good draft is just add extra picks to build in a margin for error. But I think when you get to day 3, there's another factor that comes into play, and that's that the prospects have a more limited skill set, and that means that they're not every prospect's not going to fit every team. Guys like Roma Dunze are going to fit. They're so talented. Like no matter what scheme you run, he's going to be fine in there. But the guys who are picked day 3, they're not going to fit every scheme. Every scheme requires different things from different players, and teams look for different traits in different positions. And when we're talking day 3, teams may be looking for 1 or 2 traits. And so, what do I mean by that? Take the Legion of Boom. A decade ago, with the secondary the Seattle Seahawks had, they placed a value when they were drafting corners on 1 trait, and that was length. They wanted guys who were tall and guys who had long arms. And that was like, they drafted Richard Sherman on day 3. They drafted Byron Maxwell in the later rounds. They signed Brandon Browner from the CFL. These were corners who were tall, who were big, who had long arms. That was what they looked for. And when you're talking about like the late rounds of the draft, teams usually have like 1 or 2 traits that they're looking for. And what worked for the Seattle Seahawks at corner, not every team like valued the corner position. Other teams valued different things. So when we're talking about, day 3 of the draft, we're talking about teams that are prospects who maybe have one or two good traits. And a trait the Jets value may not be a trait that Broncos value or the Saints value. So when you're trading down, I think people have the perception there's more risk than there really is, because the guys you want are probably not on the boards of a lot of other teams, because they may have the traits you want for a certain position, but they don't have the traits another team wants for the same position. So I actually think there's far less risk when we're talking about trading down on day 3 than people realize. And that's the reason. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. These things help us out and help other Jets fans find the podcast. Have a great Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.